Thank you, Paul. Art Sterritt is well known to many of you as well. He's the executive director of the Coastal First Nations Turning Point Initiative. He too has 30 years. What is it with this 30 years? It's almost like it has to be a a mentorship period before people get to sit up at the front. I suppose that's what it is. We should get gold watches. For about 30 years, he's been involved in all of the major Aboriginal issues in British Columbia around Aboriginal rights and title. He is also a decorated and celebrated artist, carver, and he's going to welcome us too, I think, Art.
Thank you. Amagan Simgiget Sigadamanak Ligiget Kabawalsik, chiefs, matriarchs, and all you people of noble birth. Good morning to all of you. And thank you to the Musqueam and the Coast Salish for sharing their abundant territory with us. My name is Art Sterritt. I'm the Executive Director of the Coastal First Nations, and this forum represents a significant opportunity for some very diverse groups to create a shared vision and ultimately a plan of what we want our marine environment to look like in the future. So today, let's begin an inclusive, proactive, and continuous dialogue as we work together to promote and create an integrated marine use planning process. To give you a bit of insight into why First Nations feel so strongly about this, I'm going to share a little bit of my life with you, not because my life is particularly significant or different, but because it isn't. Because it's kind of the same life as most other First Nations on the coast have shared, certainly less significant and less important than people like Bill Cramner or Reno Russ or Alan Wilson. So let me start 42 years ago when I was first brought to the coast by my current wife's uncle. I arrived 42 years ago on the coast to discover what I found to be the most affluent society that I had ever seen. It was unbelievable. The previous year I had spent working for a mining company in the Upper Skeena where I was paid $250 a month. I got a job on a packer for BC Packers, getting $40 a day, 30 days out of the month, and I did that for about 3 months. I worked for BC Packers from Portland Canal to Millbank Sound. I sailed amongst the Yugoslavs in Yugoslav Bay on Gill Island. I packed trollfish for the Prince Rupert Fishermen's Co-op from Langara and Wea Point in Naden Harbor. That was before there were any sport lodges on Haida Gwaii. There were strictly commercial fishermen there. I shook herring from Nanaimo to Big Bay. When we actually shook herring, when you did it by hand, that was before beater bars and all that other stuff. I have arthritis in my left hand as a result of that. I can't close my hand as a result of that hard work. I gill-netted salmon from the Blue Line on the Skeena, which is the boundary up the river, to Douglas Island and the Fraser, and everywhere in between. In 1988, I caught more than 6,000 sockeye in the Skeena River. I used some of that money to buy a house in Prince Rupert. I bought a halibut license at that time. A year later, I entered into a negotiating process where I was elected by all of the small boats that had halibut licenses to negotiate individual quotas. Sitting for DFO at that time was a guy by the name of Bruce Turris. And Bruce will remember that exercise in some lodge. We were over on the top of a hill over by Victoria. All those small boats were assuming that somehow this new individual quota system was going to make our lives better. I don't know if there's a half a dozen of those people left in the industry right now. I certainly wasn't able to make a go of it. I've been the chair of the Northern Native Fishing Corporation, which has 254 licenses. At one time, when I was first chair, it had 254 vessels as well. And now I'll bet you there's only about 40 or 50 vessels there. I went on to become a business agent for another company called Gitsand Industries, which had 70 vessels, multi-licensed vessels. I think that company and that group of people have about 3 vessels left now. I went on to become a founding member for the BC Salmon Marketing Council. Believe it or not, there was a time when Christina Burridge wasn't there. And I was there before Christina. And she came in shortly after the council was formed, and I was part of that. I fought side by side with Joy Thorkelson of the Fishermen's Union, and Patty Green, and Homer Simpson to try and save the Skeena gillnet fishery, and watched as our fleet left and DFO closed it. I saw it as the fishery closed and our industry began to die, so did our communities on the coast. So when I arrived, I was taken into a small community and introduced to a group of about 200 people. Anchored out in front of that small community at that time were 14 seine boats that belonged to that community. 40 combination gillnet, troller, halibut, crab, prawn vessels. 100% of that community was employed in the fishing industry. It was the most wonderful thing you ever saw. People were happy. Some of the elders stayed behind in the community for 4 or 5 months of the year to look after things when everybody went away. I learned later on that wasn't unusual. That was the way the whole coast was at that time. Right from Vancouver Island all the way to the BC-Alaska border, including the Nisga'a villages. So when things got tough, I decided that this industry was on the decline. I sold my nets. I sold them to Homer Simpson and his boys. They seemed to think that things were going to last. I returned to the community that I had seen this 100% employment in the 60s, to find that 85 to 90% of them were unemployed in the 90s. We tried as a community to bring ourselves back to life for a decade with no success. In 2000, my community, as well as all other coastal communities, were invited to a meeting with Drs. Cullis and Suzuki in Vancouver. And we discovered at that time that all of our communities were facing the same problems. And we joined together to pledge support for one another and came up with a plan to redesign our economy. Hopefully this time we would do it sustainably. Heck, we had to do it sustainably. Our society would probably not survive another fall like the one that we've seen for the last 40 years. So for those of you who don't know who the Coastal First Nations are, I'll share a bit of who we are and what we're involved in. We're an alliance of First Nations in British Columbia's North Coast, Central Coast, and Haida Gwaii, including Wīkinook, Heiltsuk, Kitasukheches, Gitgat, Haisla, Metlakatla, Hamalko, Old Masset, Skidegate, and the Council of the Haida Nation. We have approximately 15,000 members, and most of us live within this PNCIMA area, within the Great Bear Rainforest. This is our home. We would hope that it would be a place that we could sustain ourselves.